I'll take you live to the United Nations, where the Security Council is holding an emergency meeting on Israeli attacks on Gaza's healthcare system. This is the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk briefing the Council.
They enjoy special protections under international law. The recent report by my office documents at least 136 strikes on at least 27 hospitals and 12 other medical facilities in Gaza, which caused significant death and injury among doctors, nurses, medical staff, and other civilians, and damaged or destroyed many of the buildings targeted. In the exceptional circumstances when medical personnel, ambulances, and hospitals lose their special protection and are considered military objectives, attacks on them must still comply with the fundamental principles of distinction, proportionality, and precautions in attack. Military operations must always distinguish between military targets and civilians. The use of heavy weapons against hospitals is difficult to reconcile with that principle. Failure to respect these principles is a breach of international humanitarian law. Intentionally directing attacks against hospitals and places where the sick and wounded are treated, provided they are not military objectives, is a war crime. Under certain circumstances, the deliberate destruction of healthcare facilities may amount to a form of collective punishment, which would also constitute a war crime. If committed as part of a widespread or systematic attack on a civilian population, such acts may also amount to crimes against humanity. In most instances, Israel alleges that the hospitals were being improperly used for military purposes by Palestinian armed groups. I've in fact just received a letter from the Israeli ambassador asserting that Kamal Adwan hospital was militarized by Hamas and that Israeli forces took extraordinary measures to protect civilian life while acting on credible intelligence. Yet, Israel has not provided sufficient information to substantiate many of these claims, which are often vague and broad. In some cases, they appear to be contradicted by publicly available information. If these allegations were verified, this would raise serious concerns that Palestinian armed groups were using the presence of civilians intentionally to shield themselves from attack, which would also amount to a war crime. This is why I'm calling for independent, thorough, and transparent investigations into all Israeli attacks on hospitals, healthcare infrastructure, and medical personnel, as well as the alleged misuse of such facilities. Mr. President, I once more warn in the strongest terms about the risk of atrocity crimes being committed in the occupied Palestinian territory. I urge all those with influence to take action accordingly and to protect civilians as a matter of absolute priority. It is essential that there is full accountability for all violations of international humanitarian and human rights law. It is imperative that all parties do everything in their power to stop the fighting in Gaza so that a long-term ceasefire can take hold. All hostages must be released immediately and unconditionally. It is imperative that all those arbitrarily detained are released at once. I call on Israel as the occupying power to ensure and facilitate access to life-saving humanitarian aid, including adequate health care for the Palestinian population. I urge Israel to end its continued presence in the occupied Palestinian territory as rapidly as possible, in line with relevant United Nations resolutions, the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice, and wider international law. And I call for future recovery and reconstruction efforts to prioritize the restoration of the healthcare system in Gaza. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Turk for his briefing. I now give the floor to Dr. Riek Pieperkorn.
Thank you, Mr. President, Excellencies. So, my name is Dr. Riek Pieperkorn. I'm a WHO representative for the occupied Palestinian territory.
Let's go live now to Gabriel Elizondo. He's joining us live from the United headquarters in New York, where that Security Council meeting is taking place. Now, this is a discussion, isn't it, Gabe, on the Israeli attacks on Gaza's healthcare system. And we heard there a very strong message from the UN's High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, that attacks on hospitals breach international law, are even considered a war crime. He's calling for an independent investigation into all medical facilities in Gaza.
Yeah, that's right. This is an emergency meeting that was called by the Security Council, primarily Algeria, that holds the presidency of the Security Council for the month of January. And as you so correctly pointed out, that was a very strong briefing there from Volker Turk. He said, among other things, that they have counted 136 Israeli strikes on 27 different health facilities in Gaza. He said it's caused significant death and destruction. On the north of Gaza, he pointed out that Israel's continued bombardment of the north of Gaza that has been going on for many weeks now, he said, leaves the entire population at risk of death and displacement. But what we really have here is a split screen. At the very time that we have the Security Council meeting on the attacks on hospitals in Gaza, we see these attacks continuing as we speak. We heard from Volker Turk there as well, directly refute Israeli claims. He said, Israeli claims that they always say that these hospitals, particularly Kamal Adwan, was being used by Palestinian armed groups. Volker Turk directly addressing that, saying that Israel has provided no proof of that. And he said, even if that was true, in theory, even if that was true, Israel is still bound under international law to prevent civilian deaths in these situations. And he said all evidence points to they have not been doing that. So clearly, he said potential war crimes, potential collective punishment being perpetrated by Israel, as well as potentially crimes against humanity.
OK, Gabe, many thanks. We're just going to go back now to the Security Council meeting where we can listen to the WHO's Palestine representative, Dr. Rich Pieperkorn. So let's listen in again.
With WHO organized, facilitated by WHO. Over 12,000 people still require medical evacuation. And at the current rate, it would take 5 to 10 years to evacuate all these critical ill patients, including thousands of children. Despite this challenging environment, WHO and partners are doing all they can to keep hospitals and health services operational. However, our ability to move aid is severely compromised. The entry of supplies into and across Gaza remains extremely slow due to restrictions, delays in the clearance of supplies entering the Strip, and obstacles to our missions within Gaza. In 2024 alone, only 111 out of 279, so that's only 40% of WHO missions were facilitated, directly impacting our ability to safely and promptly resupply hospitals, transfer critical patients, and deploy emergency medical teams. Since October 2023, almost every week, WHO has repeatedly issued urgent calls to protect health workers and hospitals as per international humanitarian law. Yet these calls remain unheard. Attacks on hospitals persist. To date, WHO has verified 654 attacks on healthcare facilities in Gaza, resulting in 886 fatalities and 1,349 injuries. In North Gaza, which has been under siege for approximately 90 days, the health and humanitarian situation continues to deteriorate. Only Al-Ada Hospital remains minimal functional, and there are no primary healthcare facilities available in the area. The lack of healthcare poses a severe threat to the lives of thousands of Palestinians still in the area. Kamal Adwan Hospital, the main hospital in North Gaza, was put out of services following a raid last week and relentless attacks since October this year. WHO was constantly hindered in accessing the hospital during this period, with only 10 out of 21 missions partially facilitated. On 27 December, the hospital was emptied. A majority of the patients were forced to a nearby location, while critical patients were transferred to the functional Indonesian hospital, which lacks the necessary equipment and supplies to provide adequate care. WHO remains deeply concerned about Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, the director of Kamal Adwan Hospital, who was detained during the raid. We've lost contact with him since and call for his immediate release. Reports indicate that key areas of the hospital were burned and severely damaged during the raid, including laboratory, surgical unit, engineering and maintenance department, operation theater, and a medical store. WHO and partners' efforts over the last months to sustain the hospital's operations have been undone. We call for urgent access to the hospital to assess the damage and determine if it can be restored. We also urge for facilitation to transfer the medical equipment from Kamal Adwan to Al Alda and other hospitals in Gaza City. At Indonesian hospital, the situation continues to deteriorate. Although the hospital is out of service, 7 patients, 9 caregivers, and 6 health workers remain there. Today, the hospital reportedly received an order to evacuate and to provide a list of names and details of all those still inside. We urge that the hospital and its remaining patients who are in a dangerous and active conflict zone be protected. The hospital is already severely damaged, and further attacks will make it even harder to restore the facility. Al Ada, which is the last remaining minimal functional hospital in North Gaza, is struggling to stay open. Hostilities continue around the hospitals, resulting in an influx of injury. 37 inpatients remain inside. Food and water and fuel are depleting fast. The hospital has been without many essential medicines for more than 85 days. Access to the hospital is dangerous for patients in need due to the hostilities nearby. Unfortunately, we have just received reports that Al Ada 2 has been ordered to fully evacuate. With this, the last health lifeline in North Gaza is at the risk of being severed. WHO is planning a mission to Al Ada, Kamal Adwan, and Indonesian hospital for assessment. However, currently no roads to Kamal Adwan and Al Ada are accessible. We urge for access to be facilitated urgently and for evacuation orders to be rescinded. As I close, I want to emphasize that despite the incomprehensible challenges, the health system of Gaza has not collapsed. It's deeply affected and bruised, but against all odds, health workers, WHO and partners have kept services going as much as possible. Al-Shifa, as examples, Al-Shifa and Nasser Medical Complex, which have been restored after being left in ruins, including European Gaza Hospital, following severe attacks, raids and destruction earlier this year, are prime examples of the resilience of a Gaza health system and the inspiring dedication of its health workers, with support of WHO and partners. This is nothing short of a feat and is a reason to be hopeful. It shows what can be achieved if healthcare is protected and peace is given a chance. I want to remind that hospitals have a special protection under international humanitarian law because of their life-saving functions. While hospital may, under specific and limited circumstances, lose their protected status, such use does not then absolve any party from its obligations to comply with all other relevant rules of international humanitarian law that are applicable when launching attacks on military objectives, including the principles of distinction, precautions in attack, and proportionality. This remains fully applicable. Lastly, I repeat WHO call to ensure urgently that hospitals in North Gaza can be supported to become functional again, for an expedited pace of medical evacuation and use all corridors from Gaza to get patients out, including to the West Bank and East Jerusalem, for sustained access to hospitals, for increased flow of aid and information across and goods across Gaza, and for an urgent and lasting ceasefire. Thank you, Mr. President, for your kind and excellencies for your attention.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.